Hello, hello, okay, cool. Welcome guys, my name's Hussein. I'll be taking over Afi for today, most of today at least. I am in 4th year doing software engineering, and that's it. Any questions about myself? Nope, okay, cool. So today's lecture is going to be a pretty important one. After today, you can probably start your assignments, your project. We'll be learning how to basically make websites with Python. Previous lecture, we did a bit of HTML with Isaac. Today, we're going to show you how Flask integrates with this. So as a kind of fresh up, what is HTML? What is HTML? Who wants to take the first question of the day? No HTML? Okay. Basically, the browser, when it's displaying any type of website on any route, if you go right-click, view page source, we get all of this junk. This junk is called HTML, and it's basically how browsers will render their websites. Let's have a look at a website. So this is Bootstrap. It's a good example for me to show. Let's have a look at a quick feed. Nope. Examples. So let's have a look at this one. So here we have a nice website. It's nicely formatted and everything. There's only one problem with it. Let's say down here I want to do something, right? I'm trying to click this button and it's really doing nothing. Okay, there's nothing really happening. It's just showing stuff, but it's not actually doing anything, right? What about if I had a kind of a login up here and I wanted to actually log into the website? I can't do that with just plain HTML and CSS. This is where Python Flask comes in, or Python at least. It's a way of kind of making dynamic websites instead of just static images that just look pretty. So your project will be a combination of, well, mostly it should be just a lot of Python. But if you want to style things up, you can also use CSS. I wouldn't spend too much time on making it look pretty. We're mainly marking you for functionality. So it could look like the most dreadful website in the world, but if it works, you get most of the marks. So what is Python Flask? Well, Flask is just a Python library. So if we look it up, here it is. It's probably one of the most simplest ways to make a website. Compared to other libraries, it provides you with really bare bones stuff, just the stuff you need to get started on developing websites. Now let's just quickly get into it. I'm going to make a directory called, an example. Okay, so here's my directory. Let's say we've started our assignments. First and foremost, always create a virtual environment. Make sure you set your interpreter to Python 3. This is in general just a life tip for any Python project you work on. Virtual environments are really nice. You don't need to install global libraries, and you don't need to kind of take up all your disk space, because once you've finished with your project, you can just delete the virtual environment and save a lot of space. You guys up there, shh, please. We've got our virtual environment there. Now remember to, oops, I already have one activated, so let's turn that off. Remember to activate it. So been activate. Okay, now we're in our virtual environment. Now what we're going to do is install Flask. Now, like any Python library, we use pip, which is kind of Python's library manager, which lets us download modules. So pip install Flask. Wait for it. Hopefully UniWide's good. UniWide is good today. And we've got Flask. To confirm we've got Flask, just go into your shell and do an import of Flask. And that's all good. Now, if you deactivate your virtual environment and try to import it there, it won't work. It's only installed in your virtual environment. So for your projects, definitely use a virtual environment. Why do I say that? It's because on the day of your projects, basically what we're going to do is just run your virtual environments, and everything should be working from there. So you shouldn't spend too much time pip installing all your libraries for the demo. Sometimes people lose marks, especially if they take a long time. So it just should be one quick setup of your virtual environment, and your projects are ready to go. Any questions so far? Any questions so far? Okay. So let's actually do some Flask. Let's go into. So let's make a folder or file, app.py. The most important object we need to worry about in Flask is this object or this class called Flask. So this line up here is saying from our Flask module, import this class. And then what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate our app. So app is equal to Flask. And what we're going to give it is just __ name, which I think refers to the program name. Okay, there's our app object all done, set up. And now what we want to do is get some stuff displaying. Before we do that, we just need to understand a little bit about how websites actually work. What happens when I do this, if I just type in google.com? What's going on here? You don't want to take a guess or knows what's happening? So what's happening is my browser or my computer is somehow going to contact www.google.com, which may be in some place in the world. I will send what's called a request to www.google.com. Google will get my request and say, oh, this guy wants a web page because it's www, and then return me back some HTML. This is, at a very high level, this is what's going on. There's obviously a lot more details into it. If you want to know about the details, there is a course that goes through that. It is called COMP1531. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. So that's a networking course. I highly recommend it. I think it's foundational knowledge to go through. But for our example, this is all we need to understand. We are the client, in other words, our browser. We are sending a request to what's called a server. So the machine on the other end, for example, Google's server, the server returns us back some information we want. That's essentially how our Flask application will work. And notice, what I get back depends on the route or this URL I put in. So for example, if I send a request for this URL specifically, I'm going to get back this page. But if I send it for just a post, then I'll get something else. So depending on the route I send, I'll get different information back. And that's basically how Flask is set up. So let's set that up. So let's say I want to set up, for example, home. And home is considered to be just / like this. Usually it's empty on the browser, but there is implicit / here that just says the home page. And what we're going to do is we're going to set one up. So app.route. And this app over here refers to this object over here. And then all we're going to do is we're going to define a function. So when I go to this location, this URL, I'm going to run this function. And what am I going to do in this function? Well, you need to always return something. And I'm just going to return a string. So let's say, I don't know, Hussein is doing a good job. Keep me motivated for the rest of the 2 hours. Okay. Saved, done. Now what? How do we run this? Very simple way to run it is set up some variables. So export Flask app. I'll show you what this does in a second. App.py. And now once I've done that, I can go Flask run. This is set up a server, a local server on my machine. Right? None of you guys can access it because it's on my machine. We can tell by this URL here. So 127.0.0.1 is what is referred to localhost, or a network on my machine. So let's actually go to it. So what you can do is you can either type in localhost, or you can type in the numbers directly. I'm just going to type in localhost, and there we go. We can also type in 127.0.0.1. Now we'll go to the same place. It's just an English name for us to remember. All URLs, at least this address over here, all of them are mapped to some sort of what's called an IP address. So these numbers you see are what are called an IP address. But for us, it's easier to remember names. So localhost. Make sure you spell it correctly. So there we go. So what's going on? Let's have a look at the terminal output. So what's happening is when I do that, when I type in localhost at 5000, it's going to go and send a request to this IP address, my server. My server will pick it up over here. It's saying, oh, there's a request for the root URL and all of this fancy business. We'll go into that later on. And then it's going to go into my app. It's going to find if I've defined the home URL, and it's going to go, yep, I've defined it, return whatever it does, or run that function. So that's what's going on a high level. So let's try a different route. Let's say we want app.route something. And let's call this whatever you want. You can call the function names whatever. Doesn't need to be the same as what the route is called. This is a different route. So let's save that. I think that should be fine. It should automatically reload. So let's say we go to something now. There we go. So I've typed in a different route. It's picked it up over here. It's going to go to that function we defined from before, run that function, and return whatever the function gives out. What happens if I put in a route that's not defined? So let's say we put in, it will return you a generic error message saying request URL not found. So it's going to go in over here. It's going to say get me /Hussein. it's going to see that there's no /Hussein available, then it's just going to return an error page. So essentially what we have to do as developers, we have to basically define our routes. Let's go back to the code. Define our routes, and within this route, do some logic and return some HTML. Right? That was the overall flow of what was happening. If I typed google.com, send it to Google, Google does some stuff and returns me HTML. And that's basically the entire project. That's what we have to do in our project. All the styling stuff, making your website look nice and everything, this is all done within the browser. Within the browser. But you can also send back from your server some CSS to make it look pretty. Okay, so any questions so far on what is going on? Any questions so far? Okay, so it's pretty crucial to understand just general flow of what our Flask app does. Now, is this a question I always ask is this skill useful? Yes, very useful indeed. I would say this is what we call a back-end engineer working on kind of the back side of things. So in other words, all of this stuff. And a lot of job openings are for that. So after this course, you can put down on your resume, I know a lot of Flask and a lot of simple, web dev fundamentals, and that usually gets a lot of people hired really early on as well. So really useful stuff to know, especially early on in your degrees. Okay, so I said before earlier we want to return some HTML. Right now I'm just returning a string. So how do we actually do that? We're going to return what's called a template. So what we're going to do is from Flask, we're going to import a function called render template. And then down here, instead of returning a string, we're going to render a template, and we're going to give the file name. So in this case, our file name will be the actual HTML, index.html. And this is what most of your code will look like at the end of it. It will just be returning some templates. Now, what is a template? They are located in a directory called templates. I think it's template or templates. I forgot which one. Let me double check. Yeah, templates. Okay. Make directory. Oops, let's go back over here. Templates. So in here, we're going to define our first template. And it's essentially just some HTML. So let me open it in a different editor, index.html. Okay. So in here, let's define our HTML. I'm really bad at HTML. You don't want me to do any sort of stuff like this, but it's fine. So we'll define our doc type, HTML tags, our header, and then our body. If Isaac was here, he'd probably yell at me. And let's make a paragraph tag that says Hussein. Okay, so there's our HTML. Now let's go back to our browser, re-render it. Oops, can't be reached. Why? Because we need to rerun our server. Okay, so just a quick note, make sure you can't do Flask run unless you do the this export stuff I showed from before. So make sure you do export Flask app is equal to app.py. App.py contains the main Flask object. That's the important part. So make sure you do that. That sets up an environment variable in your shell, and then you can do Flask run. Okay, so it's running now. Let's have a look. There we go. Hussein is on the page. Let's look at the page source. And there we go. There's our HTML, which our server returned. So now, what we've done essentially is instead of having, So instead of having our one route function return the whole HTML into one function, we've kind of separated the logic. We've broken it up. So let's go back to our route code. We've separated the logic. We've said that this is the code that contains all of the logic for maybe logging in a user or adding to a database or whatever. But when we want to actually render the HTML, we just call this one function, and all that rendering is left to a different file. So this is one way of segregating responsibilities in your team. You could say, you handle all the real tough logic over here, and you focus on rendering the template and making it look presentable or whatever. Any questions so far? Any questions so far? Yep. So the index templates in general need to be in this directory called templates within your project. Okay? So just keep that in mind. I think if you have it out, it just won't work. So keep everything in your templates. This is good as well, breaking up your application into different folders. I'll show you another example how we can do that later on. In general, you want to have directories containing different stuff, which just makes it easier to look at. For example, we're about to do that right now. In our app.py, this file is probably going to contain a lot of bootstrapping stuff. So if we want to add, for example, in your projects, you may need to add all the healthcare centers or add all the patient details into a database or an object or whatever. So that might take up a bit of lines, but in the same file, we might have all of our routes. It's getting a little messy. What we can do is we can kind of just take out all of this. Let's see if this works. We take out all of this, and then all we can do is go import routes. And in our routes.py, we just paste all of our stuff there, and we just go from app, import app. So now we've broken it up into, here's our app.py, which contains all of our initialization logic, and now we have routes.py, which contains all of our routes. Why is this cool? Because if you have multiple files, there's less of a chance of having a merge conflict for your project, which is one of the most annoying things you can get. Let's make sure that it still works. Sometimes, oops, not my email. Force quit. Okay, let's make sure it all works still. Render template not defined. Oops. So that's, let's have a look at this page. So this page, what this is Flask's way of showing you an error message. This is a Flask debugging page. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not, but in this case it is. It tells us exactly what's going on. It's telling us render template is not defined. Why is that the case? Well, if we go back to our code, we're not actually importing render template. So we have to go from Flask, import render template. So let's go back, and hopefully that's all done. So there we go. That's where we fixed the bug. You'll see that page a lot, and we'll probably see that a lot today, the Flask debugging page. Okay, so far so good. There are our routes. Any questions now? Any questions? Any questions? Okay. I said earlier we want our pages to be dynamic. So we want to display different content according to what kind of user is logged in. So let's say that I want to, I don't know, let's say I have a list. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, by the way, these are just normal Python functions, so all Python stuff still applies here. There's nothing special going on. So let's say I have a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to pass this list on. And in my template, I want to print out the list. Okay, so I've created a static list over here, and in my template, I want to loop through and print out the list. How are we going to do that? So I said earlier this is just plain old HTML. I kind of lied. It's technically what we call Ginger. Ginger. It's what's called a template engine, which means it's just it's smarter HTML. So it allows you to do stuff like for loops, if statements, template inheritance, displaying data on the page, so all within normal HTML syntax. So what do I mean by that? So let's say we've got a list of numbers here. Let's say I wanted to print out the first element, list numbers 0. So I want to print out the first element. That should print out 1 on the page. So let's confirm that works. And we got first error. What have we got? List numbers not defined. What did I pass in? Did I spell it wrong? Oh wait, I know what happened. I did not save. There's the number 1. And let's say I wanted to, so yeah, make sure you save your work, otherwise you'll get errors and you don't know why. Let's say we wanted to print out, the third element in the list. There's number 4. What's happening here? Well, we've got the special syntax, double curly braces, and your data inside. If you do this, it won't work. So if you just do it like that, it won't work. It will literally just give you list numbers 3. So double curly braces is a special Ginger syntax that lets you display data from your Python objects or Python functions. Okay, so now I said I wanted to loop through the list. So how do we loop through the list? In Python, it'd be something like for number in list numbers, print out number. That's how we'd loop through a list and print it all out. In Ginger, it's kind of the same. All we need to do is surround it with curly braces. So we do, instead of double curly braces, instead it's curly brace %. And we just print out the number. And we need to write down the end of the for loop. So this will go for number in list of numbers, print and the number, and end. So we need to make sure we have this end because we need to know when to end the for loop, or Ginger needs to know when to end it. So let's make sure this all works. There we go, 1, 2, 3, 4. If we wanted to format it prettier, I guess you can surround this in paragraph tags. Oops. So you can still use plain old HTML around all of your data. And now we're just looping above. Okay, so any questions so far? Any questions so far? Any questions? Yep.
Does it automatically pad what you print out?
I think so. Let's have a look. So I just removed the paragraphs. Yeah, it looks to be a little bit of padding. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I wouldn't rely on that. You probably want to, surround this with proper HTML tags just in case. So, for example, if you wanted, say, all of these numbers to be, for example, a link, or maybe you had a navigation bar, right? You could surround this in A tags, and they turn into links. All right. You have to put a href. So href, put that as a dummy. So there we go. They turn into links. Obviously, they won't go anywhere. But that's how you can do it. So it's all plain old HTML, but just with a bit of extra stuff. So that's for loops. What about if statements? They work the same way. So let's say, now when we're on, say, for example, Facebook, we might have profile / name. Right? And this name changes to maybe, I don't know, Chris, maybe, I don't know, Dan. It all changes, and the profile page changes according to what's in that URL. So how can we do this in Flask? In Flask, we need something like this. So let's go back over here. So let's do this in, say, something. So let's say something, we want What's changing is maybe the name. So we put down angle brackets name. When we do that, we need to pass in the name as a parameter. So now every time I do something like that or like that, Flask knows this is changing and to expect the change. So let's just show you how it works. So plus name. Okay, so we're just going to return, this is a different route, plus name. So let's go back to our page. We're going to something slash, let's say Hussein in this case. So this is a different route. Oh, okay, probably should add a space. Let's go. There we go. Now if I change it, let's say Chris. Okay, so that's how we can get our page to be dynamically changed according to what's in the parameter. When is this useful for your projects? There's a certain kind of profile page, and you might have the URL change depending on whose profile it is. So that's how we can do it, and make sure you got the angle brackets over here. So any questions so far? Any questions so far? Okay, cool. Now I did say I wanted to render a template according to, so let's say this is a number 1 or number 2. According to what number that is, I might want to print out something differently. So if it's less than 10, I print out something, and if it's greater than 10, I print out something else. So how can we do that on our templates? So let's render a template. Let's call this a different one, something.html. And let's go number. Oops. Number is equal to number. Let's make sure we change all of these. So what's happening over here is, so list numbers is what's passed into the template, and this is what's in our function. So in our template code, we can use list numbers. So in our template code over here, we can use number. So let's get that set up. Let's create another template. So Vim templates. No, let's just touch it. Touch templates something.html. So let's go code templates. Just going to copy and paste it. HTML is pretty annoying to write. Okay, so here's our body. What we're going to do over here, we're going to go like this. We're going to go. So again, constructs are always bracket percentage. So data is double bracket or double curly braces, and constructs like for and if are these ones. So let's do that. So if, what do we got? So let's go back to our routes. So it's called number. So if number is less greater than, let's say, 10, we're going to go, greater than 10. And then else, so we can have else as well. Not greater than 10. And as with the for loops, we need to end our ifs. So we need to go end if. If you're finding that your code won't compile, make sure that you've ending the if statement, and you're not doing this, so you're not doing that, or one curly brace. You need the % sign in it. So that's it there. Now let's have a look at if it'll work. Let's just check our routes. Yep, all right, cool. Let's have a look. Okay, so we've got an error. What's the error over here? What's happening? What's happening? Let's have a look. Where is it? Okay, so it shows us which template's going on, and it tells us unordered type string greater than int. What's happening? It's a very common error. You've got to make sure that this number over here, as part of the URL, is always a string. So you want to make sure that you convert it to an integer. So cast it to an integer. So let's go back, and that should be fine now. So not greater than 10, and if we put in something else, it's greater than 10. Okay, so that's conditional statements in Python Flask. So, any questions so far? Any questions so far? Everybody all good? Cool. So let's take a step back, what we just learnt. So we define our stuff with this Flask object, this Flask class. We create it, called app. We can split up our files using an import routes over here, and then in our routes folder, we define routes by going @app.route, and you can define different routes for your website. Okay, that's all we need to know. Now let's say now I want to implement, let's say for example, a form. So for example, I want to sign up to a website, I fill in a form, and then I press submit. Let's not do it here. Let's get rid of this. So in other words, I want something like this. Let's say I have a form, and I have some inputs. So let's say this is of type, let's say text, and name is, let's call it name. Import, let's say type text, and this is called a password. So let's say this is password, and this is username. And then we go submit is another input tag, this time of type submit. And let's say the value is submit. Okay, so there's our index. We've created a form. What's it going to look like now? Let's go back to our page. So there's our form, right? And we can make it pretty however we want. We can style it and everything. So let's say I put in my password. Nothing's happened. Pressing submit, nothing's happened. This is where Flask comes in. What we want to happen is when we put in our username and password, and on submit, what we want is we want it to submit a request to our server. So our server picks it up, processes the information, and then returns back what's needed, maybe logging in the user. Now, who remembers what HTTP is from last week, HTTP? Yeah, can you explain it to us?
It's hypertext transfer protocol. It's just like links all the files together.
Yep, and what else?
Makes it like easy to navigate.
Sure. So what is the get method in HTTP?
Retrieve the file.
Cool. So let's go back over here. Let's go back to our output. Notice, look at the logs. Look at the logs. So get. A lot of gets. This is what we call a HTTP method. In other words, on any website, when I want to retrieve something, I said it will send the request. We'll send the request to a server. This request is something special we call HTTP. But there are different types of requests. So a very common request is just to get information. In other words, the GET request. But sometimes we don't want to get information. We might want to post information or change some information. That's what we call a post method. In other words, when when I press submit, I don't want it to submit a GET request. I want it to submit a post. So I don't want it to retrieve me information. I want it to do something with the information. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, first and foremost, in your forms, you need to put down the type of method it is. So in this case, it's going to be a post or post. So this says when I submit the form, it's going to submit it as a post request. So let's double check that all works. So let's say that, like that. Okay, so there we go. And we can see at the bottom, down there, it's sent it as a post this time. Everybody can see that? So it's sent out as a post. But it's also given me this error, method not allowed. And you'll probably see this a lot. What this means is, well, let's think about what it means. It's when I submit this, it's going to my root, my slash route, and it's asking for a post request. But currently, all my default route, it's only taking GET. By default, all it takes is GET requests. So in my code up here, what I have to do is say methods. I can take in a GET, but I also can take in a post. So I can take in both a GET request and a post request. And now, that probably should fix the error. Oops. Nope, don't want to save the page. Okay, submit. So there we go. So now, no error. It's not doing anything, but it's not giving us the error. What do we want to do? Let's go back to our code just to make sure it all works properly. Your action is, what route do I go to? Which route do I send this request to? So in this case, it's going to default to this one, but I might want to send it to another route, so something. So send this post request to this specific route. That's fine to do as well. So let's say we send it to, something. Oh, no, let's just stick to default one. So in here, we're going to get both gets and posts. And maybe on a post request, we may want to do something else. For example, let's say we're just going to print out the names of who logged in. So we need a way of differentiating between if the request is a GET or a post. To do that, we want to use what's called the request object. And in our code, we do something like this. If request.method is equal to post, not pist, do something here, like login user. Otherwise, I'm just going to render the template as normal. Any questions on this? Any questions on this? There'll be a more specific example, a little bit of time. Okay. Let's leave it at that. So that's essentially the basics we need to develop some apps. And the example I'm going to go through is, let me have a look. Yep. So the example I'm going to go through, so let's go back for my example, is a Reddit clone. So everybody should know what Reddit is. Let's assume that, let's go into my routes, app.py. Okay, so here's my Reddit clone. Here are my user stories that I've made. So let's say in your project, you've got a bunch of user stories you need to make. For example, due this Sunday. And now we have to implement them. So here's some user stories. So as a user, I can create subreddits about a topic so that I can attract discussions about this topic. As a poster, I can create a post in a subreddit so that I can initiate discussions, etc., etc., etc. We might want to have a login one down here. We've got all of these user stories. Now it's time for me to actually implement some of these. So in your projects, what you should get up to now is you've made your user stories. And then from your user stories, we create our class diagrams, right? We first initially have our requirements, our user stories, and then we design our code, our class diagrams. And then we write it in, then we actually write it in, say, Python. In this case, I've already started a bit. So here is my Reddit file. Let's probably open it in a better code at a time. So let's have a look. Oops. Okay. So I've put it in a folder called modules. Okay. So one thing to note is this from modules.subreddit. Models is this folder name. And it kind of encapsulates all my classes in this file. And that's because of this, this file, init.py. So if I have an init.py file, then this folder becomes what's called a Python module. So every class or every file in here I refer to as models.filename. So from model, this folder, .subreddit is this file, I want to import subreddit, which is this class. So in my, let's say, for example, my routes, not routes, is it app? Yep. So for example, in my app.py, if I want to import the Reddit object, I'd go from models, which is the folder, .reddit, which is this file, import Reddit, which is this class. This only works if you have this file defined, __init __.py. Why is this cool? Well, again, you can kind of break up your code into nice segments. So you don't need 1,000 Python files all in one directory flying around. It gets a little confusing sometimes. If that's confusing, hopefully we can make it more clear in the coming shoots. So let's have a look at this class, how I've made it. All I've done is say, in my constructor, I have a list of subreddits. So Reddit is just full of subreddits. I have a method that adds a subreddit. So given the name and the owner, I create a subreddit object, and then I append it, and I return true to say job well done. Otherwise, I return false. Maybe there's an error that happened. And then I have another function that just gets me a particular subreddit. So if I want to get a subreddit by a name, loop through, find the one that I want. Now, what is a subreddit? I've just said that it's a name, it has an owner, and has a list of subscribers. I don't use the subscribers too much in this demo. And then there's a bunch of other stuff down here. So it's very similar to what you'll be doing in your projects. You'll be kind of making your class to, in this case, the class diagram would be really simple. It would just be a Reddit class, and it have a composition with subreddits. So very simple for now. But in your project, it might be kind of more complicated. Now, what I want to do is, this is my kind of object that contains all the subreddit, or maybe it's kind of like a system class from a particular lab. So what I want to do is I want to create a global one of them. So Reddit is equal to a Reddit object. So now whenever I create a subreddit, I just add it to this object. You can think of it as like a database if you want, but don't take that example too far. Okay, so that's what's happening. Let's go ahead and start implementing this. So my first page, let's comment these out for a second. So in my first page, I want to render a template called index.html, and I want to pass it the Reddit objects. And then on the index.html, the home page, all I want to do is say, you know, welcome, here are my current subreddits, and then like have a form that says, do you want to create a new subreddit? So let's, where are my templates? There they are. So here it is, my beautiful HTML. So header, welcome to Reddit. Let's get rid of this for a second. So current subreddits, we'll have a for loop later, and create a subreddit. We can probably do this on a different page. So, so there we go. Now let's go back over here. Let's export Flask app equal app.py. Remember to, oops, what did I call it? Env. Okay, so source env bin activate Flask run Should be fine. Oops. Okay, so there you go. Welcome to Reddit, current subreddit, create a subreddit. Nice and plain. I said that earlier. Where's my text editor? So I said earlier that my app.py might, bootstrap some data. So maybe we add in some default data. And we do that over here. So let's say, let's add in a few subreddits. So let's go add subreddit. Let's say I want to call it, I don't know, movies. Well, let's just make sure, what is it? Got the structure right. Add subreddit name owner. Okay, yeah. So movies, and then let's say the owner is just me. Let's add a few more of these. So maybe this is games, and this is maybe / or whatever. And yep, I'm the only guy here, so I'll own all of them. So now whenever we, So now whenever we restart our website, all of these objects will be added in by default. Why is that useful? Well, now we have some default data to play around with. So in our template, let's go to index.html. Yep. There's my for loop. So for subreddit in reddit.subreddits. So let's make sure we understand the flow here. Reddit is an object we imported from app, which is this. And the class contains a list of subreddits. Okay? And we're accessing it by this property. So all we're doing in index.html is going, say, for everything in this list. That's all we're doing here. So for everything in this list, we're going to do this. I'll explain what this does in a second. So let's have a look. Oh, okay, that won't work. Let's get rid of this for a second then. Oops. Then let's just do that. Okay, so there we go. There's our subreddits. If we wanted to make it pretty, I guess we could do something like a break line. So there we go. There are all of our subreddits. If we click on them, they're not going to go anywhere. And what I want from this is, say, if I click on movies, it's going to go to, blatantly copy right here, /r/games, or /r/movies. That's what I want it to do. We'll discuss that after the break, so let's take a quick 10, 5-minute break, and we'll talk about it after then. Remember this? We have underscore init height. Remember that? If you don't have that, then you can't refer it to a module. What it means is, if you have underscore height, then you can do it. So you just create a folder in this directory. Talk about how you can get around it. Talk about how people do that.
Could I just leave it like
So you can leave it as it is.
just outside and then revert it to the Git folder?
So you can leave it inside the project.
Yeah.
Just never do
Okay.
don't want to. I'll show you how you can get around it.
Okay.
But you can leave it in your project folder.
Okay. Hi, sorry.
Yep. Yep. Control route. Just underneath. Remember earlier we had something like this without the bottom.
Oh yeah, also like I don't know.
So why do I have multiple templates? So template is specifically for render template. Model is just to make it clear.
Wait, so when you say like first line,
Flask is a library store. It's got all the storing usual.
right, so what
From Flask, it's literally saying from in the folder right now, and since this defined, it knows that this is now a model. From routes, you go similar to my model, you need the pile. And then in your actual pile, whatever way you go from routes. That's for this, they're using
brief question. So that let's say like
usually the best templates are just that stuff. Maybe we'll do it. Yeah, yeah. Not too sure. But don't try to hack around it. Usually the best templates is like it's stuff that doesn't change like if it's standard HTML header in your body, it's the same for every single page.
yeah.
That's static. So what changes? So if it's dynamic, okay, go for it. Boo, boo, boo. All right, let's get back into it. One question I was asked in the break was, So, if you look in your directory, you have this environment directory for the virtual environment. One question I was asked in the break is, do I add this to Git? Or should I add it to Git? Or how do I avoid adding it to Git? So the answer is don't add it to Git. So don't do a git add environment, only because it's large in size. If I do a git status, it's going to give me a lot of this junk. So PyCache, VS Code, env, all these PYC files, and I don't really need them to run my project. The virtual environment I can create on the day. PYC is just object code from Python, which I don't need. VS Code is specific to my text editor. And PyCache, again, can be generated on the fly. So we don't need to add these to Git. So one easy way to get around this is, instead of always having to avoid this, what you can do is you can create a .git ignore file. That's how you spell it? Yep. So in this file, what you can do is you can just list down everything you want it to ignore. So for example, .vs code. Oops. .vs code. So now if I do git status, VS Code is gone. So it's going to just completely ignore it. What about if I wanted to ignore PyCache? PyCache. Git status, that's gone as well. If I wanted to ignore my environment, that's gone as well. So now I don't need to worry about accidentally adding it to Git. I recommend making a git ignore, just in case if it's getting really annoying. So for example, I might want to ignore all of my models / __ PyCache as well. Okay, this is nice because now my git status just shows me the important stuff, the stuff I want to know that's changed. So again, what I do, you just create a file called .gitignore, add all of the stuff you want, so just add the folder name /star. Maybe there's a particular folder inside of it you want to ignore, you just do that as well. So that's how you can just ignore files you don't want to add to Git tracking. So pretty useful to know for your assignments, just in case you accidentally add the virtual environment to your to GitHub. Okay, so let's get back into what we were mentioning earlier was, how do I get this to refer to a particular link? Let's turn on my... Do I have anything running? Nope. Okay, so let's turn it on again, Flask run. So there we go. How do I get this to go change links? So I want to be able to change links. This is something is pretty cool you can do in Flask. So what you do is, in your href, you put this. Now what is this saying? Notice the double curly brace. Make sure you have that there. It's saying, get me the URL for, so URL for, get me the URL for a function called subreddit, and give it this bit of data. What function subreddit are you asking? Well, it means this one. Return welcome to plus name. Let's add some h1 tags. Okay, so let's go back to our index. So what's this part saying? It's saying if I click on this link, the reference, the href, should go to a URL that's for a function called subreddit. So the function called subreddit is over here. And pass this data in. So that's the subreddit name, which is passed in as a parameter there. So now if I go back and refresh, oops, not open a new tab. Oops. And I click on this, welcome to movies, welcome to games, and welcome to all. So that's how I can kind of jump between links using, in this case, it's really Flask and Ginger doing the job. So URL4 is a Flask function. And again, the curly braces is a Ginger thing. So when Flask runs this, it's going to see all of this stuff. It's going to use this function and replace it. So let's take a look at what the HTML it produces looks like. Yeah, so there's the href. It replaces it with the correct thing. So /rmovies, /rgames, etc. Any questions on that? Any questions on that? So if it's not working, make sure surrounded by double curly braces, using the function URL4, and using the correct function name. So this one, not the route name, the function name. Okay? All right, so that's navigation. Now let's actually create a subreddit. So I want this to link to a form where I put in a subreddit name, I press create, and it creates a new one that adds it to this list. So that's what we want to do next. So let's go back over here. Let's get back the form code. Actually, should I do that? I'll copy and paste this. So let's say we want to go to, so let's say this links to a form, or a URL called create form. And let's say we don't give it anything. So now we're going to create a subreddit, and then we're going to have a link to a form. So if we click the link, we're going to go to a different route to create our form. So let's see, this won't work because I did that. That's the wrong error. Is it? Oh, yep. Parentheses. Don't forget your parentheses. Okay, so it's going to give us this error. It's saying could not build URL endpoint for create form. That's because we don't actually have the function defined. So it's trying to find this function create form, and it doesn't know where it is. So let's actually create it down here. So let's go app.route. Let's say that the route is called /create/form. Let's call the function create form. And it's going to return a template for creating the form. So let's say this is, I don't know, create form, create subreddit.html. So we're going to render a template called create subreddit.html. That doesn't exist, so we need to create it. Oops, done with that. So let's create it. So create subreddit.html. Now I'm going to copy and paste this. But you can imagine if I keep creating HTML pages, I'm going to be doing a lot of copying and pasting. And in general, it's just going to look really ugly and messy because most of the stuff I don't want to know about. What I'm really interested in is this content over here. This stuff is all going to stay the same throughout most of my index HTML because headers usually stay the same. So what can I do here? This is where template inheritance comes in. So the concept of template inheritance. What happens is you create a base template which has some static stuff that always stays the same, and then you have a dynamic part. which other templates inherit and implement. So it's kind of like inheritance in object-oriented programming world. So let's have a look at how that works. You create a file called, let's call it base.html. This stuff is going to contain all the stuff we don't want. So let's copy and paste. So, in other words, this stuff. We don't want this stuff. And then what we're going to say is we're going to go, oops, content, I think it was content, body. Oh yeah, sorry, block, and let's say call it body. And block. So what this is saying is we have a base template, and then every other template just implements this part. So how does that work? Let's go to index.html. Let's delete this stuff. Delete this stuff. We're going to first extends or inherit base.html. And then we need to know what part we're implementing. Well, we're implementing this part. So we'll just say block body and block. So now my template has the stuff only I care about, which is the main content of the page. Everything else is kind of abstracted here. Now, I say a lot of stuff, but half the time doesn't work, so let's have a look. Yep, looks all good. So the source looks the same, but now, whenever I want to create a new template, all I need to do is, instead of copying and pasting, all I need to do is just extends base.html. Block body, which is referring to this block. You can call it whatever you want. So you can call it, content or whatever. It doesn't need to be called body. And then don't need that. And block. And probably don't need this stuff. So let's say, let's do H3. Create a subreddit. Oops. Okay. So there we go. Nice and clean now. Let's just make sure it works now. Let's go back. And if I click on this, oh no, there it is. Create a subreddit. So it works fine. Verify it, look at the page source. It's all there. One way of making your templates cleaner, have less stuff in it, because you can see that they can get pretty messy when you've got Ginger and HTML flying around everywhere. So what do we want to do? What do we want to do over here? We want to make a form that just takes in some text, and we'll call it. This is our, let's say, title of the subreddit. We want to have a submit button, so type submit. And so maybe value is equal to submit. We want this form to submit a post request, and the action is we want to go to that route we defined. So /create /form. So let's go, refresh the page. There we go. If I submit, it's not going to work. Why? Anyone remember why it's not going to work? Post request, right. So in our routes, you're going to get this error a lot. So if you ever get that error, it's because in your route you haven't defined what type of methods it can take. By default, it only takes a get, but you need to be specific. So we're going to both take a get and we're going to take a post. Now we're going to do that logic from before. So let's just make sure it works now. So yeah, it's fine now. Now we're going to do that logic. So if request dot form, if request dot method, and request is this object over here coming from Flask is equal to post then we're going to get this logic. So let's go through it in a second. Okay, so let's go through these two lines. If I submit a form, I want a way of extracting the values out of it. So in other words, I want the values out of this. I do that by doing request.form and whatever the name of the tag is called. In other words, this part. So I should probably make sure they're the same. Okay, so name refers to this over here, so I get the subreddit name. And then I want to say in my Reddit class, which is what the global one I've defined in app.py, the global object, I want to add a subreddit, so something similar to this, but within the routes. Within the routes. Now, after I've added it, so in this case, you can think of it maybe if you have a database, you might add it to the database in this case. For now, I don't have a database, but that could be an example. And now when we're finished, if I say create, I want to go back to home. I want to redirect. So to redirect, there is a function called redirect. So return redirect. Oops, not Reddit. Where do I want to redirect? I want to redirect to a URL for the function index. So I want to go back to home. So redirect me back to a URL for index. In other words, this function. Let's have a look. This actually works. So let's go back. Oops. Oops. Okay, so that's fine. So let's create a subreddit, randomly submit, and there we go. So we've added a new subreddit. If we click on it, we've got the welcome as well. So that's how we can use a post request to kind of take data given to us by the user, do some stuff with it, and update our website accordingly. So in this way, login will work, sign up will work probably like this as well. Other stuff like adding stuff to the website works as well. Deleting probably work the same as well. Any questions on that? Any questions on that? Okay, so run through the logic one more time. Here's our form. Our method is a post. Our action is going to go to this route. So in other words, this route. We have two parameters. We have our text, the subreddit name, and then we have a submit button. In our routes, we have to make sure we differentiate between when it's a post and a GET request. If it's a post request, then we're going to extract the information. We're going to add a new subreddit, and then we're going to redirect back to home. Okay, so that's adding a subreddit. Any questions before we move on? We're moving on to the last part of the lecture. Okay, so the final part we need to do in our projects is how do we handle login? And the main issue with login is if I log in and I refresh my page, I want to stay logged in. If I close my browser or close my tab and I open my tab again, I want to remain logged in. So if I sign into Facebook and I close my tab, I don't want to open a new tab and have to enter my credentials again. Or I don't want to enter my credentials every 5 seconds if I click on a link. So we want kind of like persistence. Does anyone know how this works on some websites or most websites in the world? Yeah. Not exactly. Not exactly. Not a database. Something else. Cookies. Yes. So what is a cookie? Can you tell us? Right, so a cookie, at the back, the right over there. A cookie is basically a small file store it on your browser, buy a website. Shh, guys. So if I say, for example, log in, our website will create a cookie, store it into our browser, and then every time we say request that website, my browser will send that cookie along with the request. And then the browser can go, oh, here's a cookie, he's already logged in, let's log him in. That's how we get persistence. A very high overview how they work. You can look into how they work specifically. We won't implement, so what Flask is going to do for us now is implement all that logic with a module called Flask login. So this is a module in addition to Flask that handles all that cookie and setting up session stuff. So we don't need to do it ourselves. We just need to handle, all we need to do is handle actually what? What do we need to do when a user is logging in? Just verify their passwords or username or whatever. So we focus on that part. Flask logging handles all the persistent stuff. So how does it work? Well, you first have to install it, so let's do that. So pip install Flask login. Oh, okay, already satisfied, cool. To verify that it's installed, go import Flask login. That's all good, so we can start using it. Now, an important part of software engineering, or just life skills in general for doing programming, is knowing how to read documentation. So figuring stuff out without going through video tutorials or written tutorials, just going through the documentation yourself. So let's have a look at this. So it says we need a login manager, and we need to do an init app. And then how it works is we need to provide a user loader callback, which loads a user object. Do we have a user object or user class in this instance? I didn't make one, so we probably do have to make one. So how it would work is we have this one function. We give it we kind of implement it using our own class. And then once we're in, and they provide you an example as well. Nice of them. The main part over here is login user. So once you've set all that stuff up, you just run that one function and it'll log in your user. So you don't need it. That function will handle all of the creating a cookie on the browser, setting up the session stuff. So it does all of that for you. So let's go ahead and create our own user class. So I think, no, I haven't made one. So let's go into our models again. Just as, again, side note, models.reddit refers to the folder .this file, and you can only do that if you have this file name, init.py. So if I remove this, this wouldn't work anymore. So you need to have init.py. You can do this with any folder. Okay, so let's create a file. Let's say we'll call it user.py. I'm just going to cheat for the sake of time. Actually, no, I won't cheat. So class, let's actually make one. So let's define our constructor. Self, name, password. Self._name. Self._password. Now I want to encourage good practices and not be lazy, so I'm going to define properties as well. Oh my, what the hell? Oops, probably shouldn't curse on recording. Self._name. We'll do the same thing for the password as well. _password. Okay, so there's our real basic user class. And now we need a way of kind of storing all of our users. So you can do this in multiple ways. You can just add it. You can add it to the Reddit file. You can just have like a list of all the users. I don't like this too much. It's just putting too much responsibility on the one class. It handles both the subreddits and the user logic. So and they may be really complicated logic, so I like to split them up. So I'll just create a global, let's just call it user manager, and that will contain the list of users. So class user manager self doesn't take in anything, and then we just go self.users is equal to an empty list. So what do we want to do maybe in this file? Well, we might want to add a user. So given a name and password, add this to our list. So we might say, in this part, we might have some logic, some verification. Yep. Oh, sorry, yep. All good? Cool. So in this function over here, we might have some verification logic, like making sure the user doesn't exist already, making sure maybe the password is restricted to a certain amount of characters. So, verification, good enough. Logic. What I'm going to do is just go self.users. No, wait, I'm going to create the object first. So user is equal to a user, name, password. Now we need to remember user is coming from this file, user.py, so we need to import it. It's it's getting messy. So we need to, from up here, from models.user, import user. So from my folder, my file name user, import the class user. Do I need to do this? Not really. You can do this if you want. Import models, and I think you can just do models.user.user, but that's pretty weird, so just leave it simple. And then go self.users.append user. And then you might want to return true or false depending on if the function successfully added the user or not. So maybe if, for example, you failed to verify, or you saw that the username already existed, so you might return an error saying username already exists. But for now, we're going to keep it simple. What's another function we can add to this class? What might we want to do upon logging in? We might want to just verify a user exists, right? So the login logic would be like, if verified user, log in, otherwise don't log in. So let's say verify user, self, given a name and a password. Let's loop through our list. So for user in self.users. Why does that keep happening? It happened again. If user.name is equal to name and user.password is equal to password, let's return the user. Otherwise, we're just going to return none. Null, none, whatever you want to think about it. Let's just double check that's all good. I used the right names. Yep, that looks good to me. Okay, so there's my user manager done. Let's zoom out a bit. So as with our Reddit class, we will need to, from models.user manager, import user manager. And then down here, we have to initialize our user manager. So user manager is equal to user You know, you might be asking, well, am I going to have a lot of these global objects? Not really. You should probably have like not too many. These serve kind of like as a starting point to call other classes. Okay, so there's our user manager. That's all done. Let's make sure it all compiles. So let's go to back to our terminal. What are we doing? So Flask run. That looks all good to me. And then, yep, that's all working. Okay. So now let's actually do our Flask login stuff. Let's go back to routes. So let's go back to documentation. Well, first let's import it. So from Flask login, we want login manager. That's what the website told us to do. So we need a login manager. And then we need to do this and then init. So login manager is equal to login manager, and then login manager dot init app, given the app object, which is the same Flask object we created. So that's set up, and now, according to the website, we need to provide this. So given some sort of user ID, so somehow to uniquely identify a user, maybe it's their username, maybe it's some sort of number, load the user in. So in this case, let's say it's a username, or just a name. And then what we're going to do is go return user manager dot, what is the function? Verify user. I think that should be fine. Oh, we can add another function. So get user. I guess we can just go name. Given the name, get a user. Oops. Self. So for user in self dot users, if user dot name is equal to name, return user, otherwise return none. So now in our routes, we're just going to go user.get user by this name. User manager, remember, is from our app.py, this one. So remember, we have to also import it. So user manager. Okay, so any questions so far on this? We haven't done any real hardcore logic. Okay, let's go back to make sure it still runs. Oh, syntax error, what's that? User manager. Ah, there we go. Okay. Cool. Looks good so far. There might be sneaky bugs hiding. Now we're going to actually implement login. So now we're going to go actually /login. So app.route /login. Let's say this method is a host. Def login. Whatever. Which means we need some sort of form set up. So let's go back to our index.html. So in here, we want to have some sort of form. We want to have a login form, and if they log in, then they can create a subreddit. If they're not logged in, then we can't create a subreddit. The question is, how can we get the current user that's logged in, or if there is a current user? Well, Flask login has this very convenient thing called current user, which is basically our current user object, if there is one to exist. So now what we can do in our routes is go if current user dot what? let's have a look at what Flask tells us. So it tells us a bit about our user class. We need some methods implemented. So we need is authenticated, is active, is anonymous, and get ID. We probably want is authenticated. So we want to do something like if current user is authenticated, show them the subreddit thing, otherwise show them the login form. So else login. And if. Let's see how this goes. What happened here? Oh, that's a very ugly error message. Okay, let's. Oops. Let's get rid of this one then. From oh wait, oh methods. Right. Huh. Man. These error messages. Okay, cool. So it's methods. Let's go back to index. Okay, so notice the login finally comes up. So that's all good. So let's actually make the form now. I'm going to be lazy and just copy and paste this form. We want the method to be a post. We don't want to go to this URL. We want to go to the login URL. We want a text. We want this to be our username. We want this to be our password. So we want to put in username. Password, and then we want to have some sort of login. Cool. Let's make sure that's all set up. Okay, so there's our username, password, and a submit button. Let's see, Hussein. Notice that my password comes up in clear text. You can do something like this. I think this works. You can change the type to password, and if you refresh, if you type it in, it comes up with circles. So that's how you can kind of use HTML to change what it does. For now, I'll just leave it at text so I know what I'm typing. Blah, 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 blah. Log in. And there we go, Hussein. So it went to the login route, which was defined here. Okay, now let's actually go through the process of logging in. So it's a post request. What do we need to do? What do we need to do in a post request? What's the first thing we need to do? We need to extract the data from the form. So in other words, we need to extract the username and password coming in. So let's do that. We don't need to do this if method is equal to post, right? Because the only method it takes in is a post. So we don't need to worry about gets or whatever. It's only going to expect the post. So we can go username is equal to request.form. And now we just need to make sure we copy this. So it's this value, so username. Password is request.form. Again, we extract it out. Make sure it's the same as this name attribute. So now we have the username and password. Just to make sure login is working in general, I'm going to cheat a bit and just go user is equal to user manager dot get user by this username. And then I'm just going to log in user. And then once I'm done, I'm just going to redirect back to index. So I'm going to get the username. And notice I'm not doing any password checking, anything here. So in your code, you'd probably have to do some password checking. I'm going to log in the user, and then I'm going to redirect back. So when I redirect back, it shouldn't show me the login form, it should show me create a subreddit. Now, as I said from before, with bootstrapping your application, you add your subreddits as dummy subreddits, and here we can add kind of dummy usernames to set us up easier. So we can go user manager.add user. So in your assignments, in your projects, you might be given a CSV file containing all of the username and passwords in existence. What you may have to do is extract all of that stuff and create the objects themselves. I think we gave you the code for that last year, so you might not need to do it. But you still need to understand what's going on. So let's add user. Let's go back to see how the function works. Add user by name and password. So let's say Hussein, and my password is just password. Yeah, we'll just do one of them. Okay, so that's done. And now, moment of truth, will this work? If you get an error like just what we did there, refresh the page a couple of times. Sometimes it doesn't pick up the saved files straight away, so double check that. So I think it's all good. Okay, let's try now. Hussein, password, submit. Login user is not defined. Of course, can't just create functions out of thin air. You need to get it from Flask login. It's a function provided by Flask login. Let's go back. Let's do that again. So Hussein, password. Okay, so here's our first error. User object has no attribute is active. Let's go back to the documentation. What did it say? Our user class, whatever user class we have, Flask logging is expecting these attributes. So we need to define them in our class. Now, I'm extremely lazy, and Flask logging knows that I'm lazy. You can just inherit from user mixin, special class. And user mixin is provided by Flask login, and it provides you like a base template that has all of the stuff that you need. So let's go ahead and go back to our user class. So from Flask login import user mixin, and make sure we inherit from user mixin. Remember the parentheses in your class. Classes mean inheritance. Okay, so that's finally defined. Let's see if the error changes this time. So Hussein, password. Okay, again, another error. No ID attribute, override get ID. Who wants to guess what this means? No takers? Let's go back to the documentation. Get ID. This method must return a Unicode that uniquely identifies this user. So we need to implement a method inside of our class that just returns us a unique ID for the user. In this case, we can just use the user name. That's fine. That works. Now let's see if we've finally fixed all the bugs. Password. User object has, oh God, so many. Oh, /_name. Password. Okay, another error. Oh God, this is unbelievable. Okay, so session is unavailable because no secret key was set. So when you get this error, you need to go back to your app.py and you need to set a secret key. So .secret key, this is for your application object, so your Flask object. Set it to something very secretive. This is very secretive. Okay, one more time. There we go. Now we've logged in, finally. And now let's refresh the page. Refresh. Let's open a different browser. It's all good. So it's logged in persistently. Now obviously, and if you have a look up here in your browser, you can see the cookies that's created from localhost. There's the cookie. There it is there. Let's see what happens when we remove it. Done. Refresh the page. We go back to the login page because we just deleted the cookie that it set. So there's no more cookie existence. So remember, when I load up my web browser, the client checks to see if there's a cookie. If there is one, it sends it to my server and it configures some stuff. In this case, I deleted it, so it's no longer there, so it's not going to remember me. How do I do log out? Again, it's very similar to logging in. You just need a route for it. So app.route/logout, def logout, logout user, just like that, and then just redirect back and make sure you log out. So there's our logout. How do we actually press the button to log out? Well, again, in your index, you might want to say, create a link that redirects you back to logout. Logout. So let's have a look, confirm that works. Oh, okay. Oh, cannot import name logout. Routes.py, logout user. Logout user, and did I use it down there? Yep, looks good. So let's refresh, cool. Sign in, works, logouts, logs me back out. If I refresh the page, I'm not logged in. Okay, so that's Flask login, very simplistic way. I mean, I've kind of like glanced over what we'd need to do. In your actual assignment, you'd probably need to do some checking here to check if I've logged in or not, or if I've got the correct password. You might want to return an error message to say when if I put in the wrong username and password, you might want to return an error message saying, wrong username and password. One way to do that is using something called Flask Flash, but I won't go through that here. Now, let's say that these URLs I only want to access if I've logged in. To do that, all you need is this. You just go up here, at login required. And yes, you need to import that as well. So now if I refresh, name, oops. I've forgotten the name for it. Anyway, don't worry about that. But it's something like this. I'll put my code up on GitHub so everybody can look at. The proper implementation is there. But basically, if you have this in your code, then whenever you press the link, it won't let you go to that link because you need to be logged in. All right, I think that's all for today, just for the recording to run out. If you have any questions, just come up and ask me or email.